chapter 17 of Eric Foner's Give Me Liberty textbook for AP. We are going to start on, if you're following along the textbook, on page 688 with the segregated South. All right, so populism does not take over in the South. It's the gulf between black and white is too great for most populist candidates to span, and the people who are wanting to keep themselves in charge have been able to do their little division spiel much better than the populists were able to combat it. So we have merchants, planters, business entrepreneurs, and they are the ones that are dominating this region's politics. And as you learned in, I believe it was maybe chapter 15, maybe it was chapter 16, I don't remember, but they called themselves the Redeemers because they fancy themselves the group that is going to redeem the South, is going to save them from the rule of these terrible black people. It's like, well, maybe you wouldn't be so scared if you hadn't been so horrible to them for so long. Just thought. They undo just basically everything about Reconstruction. I really hope the only people that are listening to these videos are the people I'm teaching, but you all know that, we're from here. Like, it's ridiculous. They slash our state budgets, they slash taxes, they reduce public facilities, so hospitals, asylums, those all close. The public school system is gutted. Wait a minute. This is, okay, and I do want to point out, this is after 1877, not currently. The textbook points out that Louisiana spent so much on education that it became the only state in the Union in which the percentage of whites unable to read and write actually increased between 1880 and 1900. So, I don't know, I guess thank God it wasn't Mississippi. Obviously, our schools, the segregated schools for black children are the worst hit here because, of course, they are. So some of our black codes in them, I can't remember if I assigned them to you or not, but we have these laws put into place where any person can basically be arrested if they do not have proof of employment. It's under vagrancy laws, and penalties for crimes increase greatly as well. So these are ways to circumvent, the abolition of slavery and basically keep the formerly enslaved people of African descent, basically anyone who's not white, keep them enslaved without calling it slavery. As you all know, the 13th Amendment allows involuntary servitude for those who have not been convicted of crimes. And that little loophole allows the fact that anyone who has been convicted of a crime, such as loitering or vagrancy, they can be put on a prison chain gang. So every southern state is putting a portion of its convicted criminals in the hands of private businessmen. Again, I would like to reiterate, this is 1877 and up to about 1900. Railroads, mines, lumber companies competed for this kind of cheap, involuntary labor. As we can guess, the conditions inside I guess we'll call them labor camps, for lack of a better term. The conditions here are just terrible. You have disease, you have death rates high, and it's really not anyone's concern at the time because if, one person dies, we'll just replace them with another criminal. The Knights of Labor really don't like this. They make convict labor a huge issue, And Tennessee they end up abolishing what's called the convict lease system, um, after, some protest and some burning and whatnot. But then they just replace it with something that's state owned. So good for them. I don't know. I'm checking my notes to make sure that I didn't miss anything. Okay, so here's one thing I want to point out before we move on to the next slide. In the 1880s, Atlanta editor Henry Grady relentlessly promotes the dream of a new South. So that's Henry Grady. And this is where we get the kind of the philosophy of the New South, the thought of what is going to be the New South. And it's all centered on Atlanta, obviously, because Henry Grady is from Atlanta. He says that industrialization and agricultural diversification is going to bring prosperity to the region. But on the whole region ends up becoming more impoverished. Mining and textiles, they develop in some areas, but the fact that the region has low wages and the convict lease system and the governments aren't taking much in taxes, so the government's then not able to invest in infrastructure and whatnot. As we can see in the city of Jackson, when you do not invest in your infrastructure, the only thing you're doing is passing the problems on to later generations. And, nobody wants to pay high taxes, but they do want to have clean and safe drinking water. And, they do want to have their roads pothole free. So it's like you've got to find that happy medium between keeping taxes low and your citizens happy, along with being able to provide for those citizens that end up being your tax base. By 1900, except for major iron and steel producing areas in Birmingham, our southern cities have little industry, and they still mostly export cotton, tobacco, and rice. As a whole, the South stays dependent on the North for capital, for manufactured goods. And as late as the 1930s, President Franklin D. Roosevelt would declare the South the nation's primary economic problem. So it's kind of as if the war comes through, destroys all the prosperity, and then, like, everybody pouts for a really long time. Some people still haven't stopped pouting, and who knows? Let's see. Here is an example of convict labor. I don't know what that was. I don't know if you heard it, but I heard it, and it was weird. Here are some coal miners. It says this is one of the few occupations where black people and white people worked side by side. So if we're looking at black life in the South, black farmers are our most disadvantaged rural Southerners.